Two guards blocked the entrance, their faces smug and cruel in the flickering lamplight. The precious bread slipped from her numb fingers, landing with a soft thud in a muddy puddle. "Nowhere left to run, street rat," one of them sneered, his hand resting on the hilt of his club. They were right. Behind her was a beating, maybe worse. But to her left, looming over the undercity like a stone god, was the wall, the boundary to the Lycan king's domain, a place of monsters and shadows, a place no human dared to tread. A choice made in a single, desperate heartbeat. She wouldn't give these men the satisfaction of breaking her. Spinning on her heel, she sprinted away from them, her bare feet slapping against the wet stone, running directly toward the massive iron-bound gates of the Lycan castle. A choice made in a single, desperate heartbeat. She wouldn't give these men the satisfaction of breaking her. Spinning on her heel, she sprinted away from them, her bare feet slapping against the wet stone, running directly toward the massive iron-bound gates of the Lycan castle. The guards' laughter followed her, sharp and disbelieving. "Let the wolves have her," one of them bellowed into the storm. To them, she was simply trading one cage for another, one death for a more gruesome one. But as her small, trembling hand slammed against the cold iron of the gate, Anya wasn't begging for her life. She was a tool offering itself for use. She would rather be broken by a king than discarded like trash by the world that had already left her for dead. Anya kneels on the cold marble, the court's jeers a physical blow. She keeps her eyes down, her voice a fragile thread. "My hands are useful. I can mend leather, fabric. Give me a roof and food, and I will serve." She offers the only thing she believes she has. From the throne, King Rorik is utterly still, but the air itself freezes. The scent of wild honeysuckle and rain cuts through the hall, slamming into his soul. A single ancient word echoes in his mind. "Mate." A low, possessive growl rumbles from his chest, and the court's mockery dies instantly. He rises, not a man standing, but a mountain shifting, casting a shadow that swallows Anya whole. At his feet, his two guardian wolves, Fenrir and Skull, get up with him, their movements a silent, deadly promise. The room crackles with a power not seen in centuries. "I accept." Rorik's voice is a low thunder that shakes the stones. Counselor Malachi steps forward, his face twisted with disgust. "My king, this human filth has no place." Rorik's head snaps toward him. He says nothing. His amber eyes burn with such lethal intent that Malachi physically recoils, his protest dying in his throat. The king descends the dais, his predatory strides ending directly in front of the girl on the floor. Ignoring the grime, he extends a hand large enough to crush her. His voice is a low command that vibrates through her bones. "She comes with me." He pulls Anya to her feet as if she weighs nothing and strides from the hall, leaving a stunned, silent court in his wake. He didn't drag her to the dungeons or the servants' quarters. His long strides forced her into a near run, pulling her through halls of cold, imposing stone that echoed with the silent power of his lineage. The torches on the walls seemed to bow as he passed, casting flickering shadows that danced like ghosts at their heels. She expected a cell, a cot, a demand for labor. He stopped before a door of dark, polished oak, its iron handle shaped like a slumbering wolf. Rorik opened it and gestured for her to enter. The breath caught in Anya's throat. This wasn't a room. It was a sanctuary. A massive hearth roared with a contained fire, casting a warm, golden light across a bed piled high with furs and a carpet so thick it looked like freshly fallen snow. She hesitated on the stone threshold, a dirty stray afraid to soil something so pure. The warmth from the fire was a physical touch, a kindness she hadn't felt in a decade. Her bare feet, blue with cold and bleeding from the city's unforgiving cobblestones, recoiled from the edge of the pristine rug. She was filth. She had no place here. Rorik's gaze dropped to her feet. A muscle in his jaw clenched, a flicker of contained violence in his eyes not meant for her, but for the world that had done this. He didn't speak a word to her. Instead, he turned his head slightly and issued a low command to the empty hall, a growl that was somehow heard and obeyed instantly. Moments later, a servant appeared, head bowed, carrying a basin of steaming water, fragrant with the scent of mountain herbs. With trembling hands, the servant set it down near the fire, along with clean linen bandages and a small jar of salve, then vanished as quickly as they had come. No one dared meet the king's eyes. Anya stared at the basin as if it were a trap. Every kindness she had ever known came with a hidden price, a debt to be paid in pain or humiliation. She looked up at Rorik, her eyes wide with suspicion, waiting for the demand. His voice was a low rumble, softer than she thought possible. "For your feet." He didn't move toward her, didn't force the issue. He simply stood by the door, a mountain of a man granting her an ocean of space. His two wolves, Fenrir and Skirl, padded silently into the room, circled once, and lay down before the hearth, their massive heads resting on their paws. They watched her not as a threat, but as a new fixture in their territory. Days bled into a strange, silent routine. Food appeared outside her door. Simple, elegant tunics of soft wool replaced her rags. No one spoke to her. No one gave her an order. The waiting was a unique form of torment. Convinced she had to earn her keep, she began mending things. A tear in a curtain, a loose binding on a book. It was the only way she knew how to exist. One evening, Rorik entered to find her re-stitching the leather grip on a practice sword she'd found in a chest. He watched her for a long moment, his presence filling the room. He placed a tangled, knotted mess on the table beside her. It was a royal map case, its intricate leather cords snapped and frayed. "My strategists spent hours on this." They declared it a loss. Her fingers, scarred but nimble, hovered over the mess. It wasn't just a knot to her. She could feel the memory in the leather, sense the pattern of how it was meant to be woven. It was a language she understood better than words. In the quiet focus of her work, she forgot the king was even there, her hands moving with an instinct she couldn't explain. When she was done, the cords were not just repaired, they were stronger, the pattern restored to its original complex beauty. She pushed it silently toward him, her eyes on the table, expecting to be dismissed. But Rorik didn't look at the map case. He looked at her, his amber eyes burning with an intensity that stripped her bare. "My men saw a knot," he said, his voice a low vibration that resonated deep in her chest. "You saw the path through it. You don't just mend what is broken, Anya. You understand its design." For the first time in her life, someone wasn't praising her hands. They were seeing her mind. That single sentence of praise hung in the air, more terrifying and more precious than any jewel. For the first time, Anya felt the sting of tears behind her eyes, not from pain, but from a dizzying, unfamiliar hope. He saw her, not the street rat, not the servant, but the mind behind the mending. It was a validation so profound it threatened to shatter the walls she had built around her heart for 2 decades. The next day, Rorik didn't send for her. He came himself. He found her staring into the fire, and without a word, he simply gestured for her to follow. He led her not to a workshop, but to the heavy oak doors of his war council chamber. The guards stiffened, their eyes widening in shock as the king ushered the silent, human girl inside. The air grew thick with the scent of old leather, steel, and the barely suppressed animosity of 24 Lycan lords. They ignored her, of course. She was a piece of furniture, a king's strange new pet. They argued over maps, their voices booming with the arrogance of apex predators. They spoke of a rebellion brewing in the northern territories, of supply lines being cut by an enemy they couldn't seem to track. Councillor Malachi sneered as he spoke, his arguments sharp and designed to undermine a rival general. It was a display of power, not a search for a solution. Anya stood near the wall, a shadow among giants, but she wasn't just listening to their words. She was watching their hands, the subtle shifts in their weight, the way one general's eyes flickered to the wrong part of the map when he spoke of his patrols. She saw the tension in the room, not as a debate, but as a poorly woven tapestry, its threads pulling against each other, threatening to unravel. Suddenly, the room fell silent. Rorik's voice cut through the noise, low and absolute. "Anya." Every head turned. Her heart leaped into her throat. He didn't look at her, his amber eyes fixed on the map. "You have heard the noise. Now tell me what you see." It wasn't a request for an opinion. It was a command to use the very site he had just named. Her voice was a whisper, but in the dead silence, it carried like a bell. They are not cutting your supply lines. She pointed a trembling finger to the map. They are letting them through. The grain carts from the south. The reports say they are lighter when they arrive at the northern garrison. She paused, her breath catching. They are not stealing your supplies. They are poisoning them. A wave of disbelief and derision rippled through the room. Maliki let out a short, barking laugh. Poison? The ramblings of a starved human girl. My king, this is madness. But Rorik didn't look at Malachi. He looked at his oldest general, a grizzled wolf whose face had gone pale. The king's command was a lethal hiss. Check the grain stores, now. The truth was a swift and brutal verdict. The grain was tainted with a slow-acting poison, designed not to kill quickly, but to weaken the entire northern army over a matter of weeks, just before the rebellion was meant to strike. Anya hadn't just prevented an ambush. She had averted the collapse of his entire northern defense. She had seen the flaw in the pattern that no one else could. That night, Rorik found her again, not in the council room but in the royal library, her hand tracing the faded gold leaf on a book spine. He didn't speak of the poison, or the council, or the stunned silence of his lords. He simply stood beside her, his presence a warm, solid wall. For centuries, my council has been filled with wolves who think only of the next fight, the next conquest. He reached out, his large, scarred hand gently taking hers. He turned it over, his thumb brushing over the calluses on her palm, the small scars from a lifetime of mending what others had broken. They see strength in tooth and claw, he rumbled, his voice vibrating through her very bones. I was a fool. True strength lies here. His gaze lifted from her hand to her eyes, and the raw, possessive fire in them was now tempered with something far more potent, reverence. It lies in the one who can see the frayed thread before the entire banner rips in two. The piece was a fragile, sun-warmed glass, and it was about to shatter. Anya stood beside the king's war table, no longer a shadow, but a quiet presence, pointing to a discrepancy in a border patrol report. For the first time, the Lycan lords were listening, their initial scorn replaced by a grudging respect. It was in that moment of fragile victory that the great hall doors slammed open, the sound echoing like a death knell. Councillor Malachi strode in, his face a mask of triumphant malice. But he was not alone. Trailing behind him was a woman whose face was etched into Anya's nightmares, Mistress Vexia, the cruel merchant from the Undercity, her eyes darting around the opulent hall like a rat in a pantry. Anya's blood ran cold. The warmth fled her body, replaced by the familiar icy grip of dread. The floor beneath her feet suddenly felt like the muddy cobblestones of the alley she'd so desperately fled. "My king!" Malachi's voice boomed with false deference. "Forgive the intrusion, but a matter of grave deception has been brought to my attention." He gestured dramatically to Vexia. "This honest merchant has a claim against the human you have so generously sheltered." Vexia stepped forward, her confidence swelling in the oppressive silence. She sneered directly at Anya, her voice dripping with the same poison Anya remembered from years of servitude. "That one? She's a thief. Stole from me for years, that she did. A worthless stray who's only good for one thing, mending nets until her fingers bleed for a scrap of bread." The words were a physical blow, stripping away Anya's newfound dignity, leaving her exposed and trembling before the court. Vexia's voice rose, playing to the gallery of wolves who already saw her as less. "She has no mind for strategy. She has a mind for knots and thread because she's a tool, an object. She has fooled you all into thinking a work animal has a soul." Malachi seized the moment, his voice cutting through the rising murmurs like a blade. "You see, my king? Her entire existence here is a lie. She has manipulated your kindness, a parasite in our very halls. I demand she be handed over to the city guard to face justice for her crimes." He looked at Rorik, a challenge in his eyes, daring the king to defend this human filth against one of his own council and the word of an honest citizen. All of Anya's progress, every ounce of worth she had dared to feel, crumbled into dust. She looked at Rorik, her heart hammering against her ribs, expecting to see the flicker of doubt, the cold calculation of a king cutting his losses. She was a stray, a tool. Vexia was right. The dream was over. She braced herself for the command that would send her back to the darkness. Rorik did not move. He did not roar. The air around him dropped 10 degrees, a predatory stillness that was far more terrifying than any rage. The murmurs of the court died in an instant, choked by the sudden, suffocating pressure of the king's silent fury. He took one slow step, then another, his movements deliberate, as he placed his body directly in front of Anya, shielding her completely from view. He was a mountain of granite hiding a single, precious flame. His amber eyes, cold as ancient stars, locked on to Malachi. "You call her a parasite." Rorik's voice was a low, lethal rumble that vibrated through the stone floor. "You say she has a mind for knots because she is a tool." He turned his head just enough to address the entire frozen court. "This tool saw the poison in our grain while my greatest generals saw only numbers on a page. This parasite restored a battle standard my finest artisans declared lost." He paused, letting the weight of his words crush them. "She has done more to protect this kingdom in a month than you have in a century, Malachi." His gaze flicked to Vexia, dismissing her with a single contemptuous glance. "As for you, merchant," he hissed, the word an insult. "Your contracts in the Undercity are void. Your assets are seized. You will spend the rest of your miserable life mending the nets you once used to trap others, for a single scrap of bread a day. See how it feels to have hands without a face." Vexia's face collapsed in horror, the sneer melting into a puddle of pathetic fear. Then, his full, undivided attention returned to Malachi, and the counselor physically flinched. "You brought this filth into my hall not to unmask a thief, but to hide a traitor. The poison plot had your seal on it." The revelation hit the room like a thunderclap. Rorik didn't wait for a denial. He strode back to Anya, ignoring the gasps of his lords. He took her trembling hand, his touch surprisingly gentle, and pulled her to his side. He held their joined hands up for all to see. "You are wrong," he declared, his voice shaking the very foundations of the castle. "She is not a stray I sheltered. She is the other half of my soul. She is my mate, and she is your queen." The words echoed in the stunned silence. Queen. The title hung in the air, an undeniable, irrevocable truth. Rorik turned his back on the disgraced counselor and the weeping merchant, his message absolute. He led Anya from the war room, his hand holding hers in an unbreakable grip. He didn't look back as guards seized a sputtering Malachi. The dream wasn't over. It had just been forged in the fire of his claim, and its iron will would never be broken again. Their wedding was not an affair of state, but a ceremony of the soul. Under the ancient heart tree in the castle's central courtyard, Anya stood not in silks and jewels, but in a simple white wool dress she had embroidered herself with the sigils of both their houses. Rorik, foregoing his crown, met her in simple black leather. When he took her hands, he didn't see a queen, but the woman who had seen the path through his own knotted soul. Before the eyes of Lycans and humans alike, he vowed not to give her a kingdom, but to share his, for she had already saved it. Queen Anya's first decree was not a tax or a treaty, but the establishment of the Menders' Guilds in the Undercity. She used the royal treasury to build warm, safe workshops where the forgotten and the invisible could find purpose, a hot meal, and fair pay for their skills. She walked among them not as a distant monarch, but as one of them, her hands still calloused, often helping to untangle a particularly stubborn knot. She didn't just give them charity, she gave them back their dignity. Rorik, beside her, became a king his people had never seen. The raw, predatory power was still there, a shield for his kingdom, but Anya's quiet strength had tempered his rage into a focused, unwavering justice. He listened more. He saw the strength not just in warriors, but in weavers, farmers, and healers. Their council meetings were no longer dominated by growling lords, but by a king and queen who ruled as one mind, one heart, their combined strength a force that brought unprecedented peace and prosperity. Years later, the sound of laughter echoed in the stone halls that had once known only silence. Two children, A boy with his father's amber eyes and a girl with her mother's clever hands chased the great wolves Fenrir and Skjöll through the gardens. They were a new generation, born not of conquest, but of restoration. They were the living proof of a bond that had healed a king and rebuilt a kingdom from the inside out. Their legacy was written not in books of war, but in the thriving streets of the Undercity, in the full granaries, and in the faces of a united people who no longer saw a wall between them, but a bridge. The story of the street rat who became queen was told to every child, a lesson that true worth was never in what you owned, but in what you could mend. The world had once cast her aside as a worthless scrap. To the king, she was the golden thread that stitched the soul of his kingdom back together. Mistress Vexia's downfall was a slow, agonizing slide into the very misery she had crafted for others. Her assets seized, her name a curse in the Undercity she once ruled, she was left with nothing. To survive, she took a job in the very guilds her former victim had created. She spent her final bitter years mending fishing nets for a single scrap of bread a day, her fingers raw and bleeding, her name forgotten, becoming exactly what she had once called Anya, a pair of hands without a face, and Malachi, the proud counselor, suffered a fate worse than death. Exiled to the frozen northern wastes, stripped of his name, his rank, and his pack, he was forced to live as a lone wolf. The status he had murdered to protect was gone. The power he craved turned to ash in his mouth. He spent his days hunting rabbits for sustenance, haunted by the memory of the human girl he called Filth, the quiet tool who had unraveled his entire world with a single, perfectly observed thread.